Neka, my love, you have made me the happiest man alive today. Thank you all for celebrating with us.
The red dust of Feg, Onitsha, had a way of settling on everything: the storefronts, the school uniforms, and the shared memories of two children who grew up under the watchful eyes of the same street. For Abina and Neka, life wasn't a romance novel, it was a series of shared chores and the rhythmic tolling of the church bell. The guardian of Feg Street. In their primary school days, Abina was Neka's unofficial shadow. It wasn't because of a childhood crush, but rather a sense of duty born from their mother's deep friendship. If a bully tried to seize Neka's lunchbox or if she tripped near the open gutters after a heavy rain, Abina was there. He moved with a quiet, protective instinct. To him, Neka was simply an extension of his own family, someone to be shielded from the rough edges of Onitsha life. A routine of grace. Their holidays were dictated by the discipline of a traditional Igbo upbringing and the calendar of the local parish. The mornings were for the street children routine. Morning: sweeping the compounds and scrubbing the heavy iron pots from the previous night's jollof rice. Afternoon: running errands to the main market or local kiosks. Evening: retreating to the cool, incense-scented air of the church. It was in the sanctuary that their bond deepened. Abina, sharp in his white cassock and red surplice, was a dedicated altar server. Neka, equally focused, served alongside him. They learned the choreography of the Mass together: when to ring the bells, when to hold the lectionary, and how to walk with a solemnity that belied their young ages. Watching the sunrise through the stained glass during weekday morning Mass, they became more than neighbors, they became two halves of a singular childhood experience. The shift in senior secondary. By the time they reached senior secondary school SSS, the dynamics began to shift. The protection Abina once offered out of neighborly habit started to feel different. One evening, after a particularly long choir rehearsal, they walked home as the sun set over the river Niger. The frantic energy of Onitsha was slowing down, replaced by the smell of roasting corn and suya on the street corners. Abina, Neka said, breaking the silence, "You've been walking me home since we were in primary 1. Don't you ever get tired of being my bodyguard?" Abina looked at her. She wasn't the little girl who needed help with her math homework anymore. She was poised, intelligent, and had a laugh that had recently started to make his heart skip a beat. "I'm not a bodyguard," he replied, his voice dropping an octave. "I'm just making sure you get to where you're going. I've always done that." "But why?" she teased, stepping closer. "Because our mothers are friends." Abina stopped walking. The noisy yellow tricycles Kiki Napep whizzed past them, but the world felt quiet. "At first, yes," he admitted. "But now, I think I do it because I can't imagine walking these streets and not seeing you beside me." From childhood to forever, the realization hit them both in the humid evening air of Feg. The transition from family friends to something more wasn't a sudden explosion, but a gentle unfolding, like the way the morning mist clears over the Niger. They had spent years serving at the altar, caring for their homes, and looking out for one another. They didn't need to go looking for love, they had already built its foundation in the dust of their street and the pews of their church. As they turned the corner toward their houses, their hands brushed, then locked. In the heart of Onitsha, amidst the hustle and the noise, Abina and Neka had found a quiet, enduring rhythm that belonged only to them. The transition into junior secondary school brought a new layer of maturity to the streets of Feg. The oversized uniforms of their primary school days were replaced by the well-tailored checks and whites of their respective secondary schools. Yet, despite the change in scenery, their morning ritual remained sacred. The meeting point at the corner of their street, right under the shade of a massive whistling pine tree. The morning meeting. One humid Tuesday morning, Neka arrived at the spot a few minutes later than usual. She was clutching a slim, colorful book against her chest, her fingers tucked firmly into the pages to hold her place. A blue Bic pen was wedged deep into the spine, acting as a makeshift bookmark. Abina was already there, leaning against a low wall, adjusting his school bag. The moment she reached him, his natural curiosity, and that old habit of looking out for her, kicked in. You're late today, he teased, reaching out to playfully snatch the book from her hands. What is this that has made you forget the time? Abina, wait, she cried out, her eyes widening. Don't open it too wide. Do not remove the pen from that page, I'm serious. I don't want to lose where I am. A clash of genres. Abina held the book gingerly, respecting her command but looking at the cover with a skeptical tilt of his head. He was used to seeing Neka with textbooks or the Bible, but this was different. Do you even read novels? Neka asked, adjusting her beret and looking at him with a challenge in her eyes. Abina puffed out his chest slightly. Of course I read. I've finished almost all the James Hadley Chase books my older cousin has. The vulture is a patient bird, believe this. You'll believe anything, those are real stories. Fast cars, detectives, and big heists. Neka rolled her eyes, a small smile playing on her lips. Chase, all that fighting and shouting. It's too much stress, Abina. You should try something with a bit more heart. The Mills and Boone Revelation. She pointed to the book in his hand. The cover featured a dramatic illustration of a couple standing near a moonlit balcony. The title was embossed in a swirling, elegant font. This is a Mills and Boone, she explained, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. It's a romance novel. You should start reading these instead of those crime stories. I think you'll actually like it if you give it a chance. Abina looked from the romantic cover back to Neka. To a boy raised in the rugged environment of Onitsha, where toughness was the local currency, the idea of reading a romance novel felt alien, perhaps even a bit girly. Romance. He scoffed, though he didn't hand the book back immediately. What happens in there? People just talking and crying. No, Neka countered, stepping closer so their shoulders almost touched. It's about how people care for each other. It's about being brave in a different way. Just read the page where my pen is. Just one page. The seed of change. Abina looked down at the pen tucked into the paper. He didn't read it then. The school bell was already echoing in the distance, but the suggestion lingered. As they began their walk toward the bus stop, the conversation about chase and romance continued. Abina defended his thrillers, but for the first time, he found himself wondering what Neka found so captivating in those pages. He realized that while he had spent years protecting her from physical bullies on the streets of Feg, these books were teaching her about a world of emotions he hadn't yet explored. Fine, he said as they reached the junction. If I finish my current chase novel, maybe I'll borrow one of your Mills and Boone. But if I start crying, I'm blaming you. Neka laughed, a bright sound that cut through the morning noise of the Onitsha traffic. Deal. But be careful, Abina. Once you start, you might realize you've been a romantic all along. That morning, as they split up to head to their different classes, the red dust of Feg seemed a little less harsh, and the bond between the altar boy and the altar girl gained its very first chapter of a brand new story.
I think this book might help you.
Thank you, Neka.
It's beautiful, Obina. The climb ahead is long, but we'll face it together.
We will.
The exchange of that first book under the whistling pine tree opened a floodgate that neither of them expected. What started as a challenge from Neka became a secret curriculum for Abina, tucked away in the bustling streets of Feg. The secret library of Feg. The supply chain was discreet and efficient. Every Sunday after the morning mass, or during their evening walks back from the parish, Neka would slide a new, thin volume into Abina's hand. She had an impressive collection, titles like The Garden of Dreams, Yesterday's Shadow, and A Rose in Spain. Neka became his curator. She didn't just give him any book, she selected stories she thought would resonate with his protective nature. She would dog-ear specific pages, sometimes leaving the blue Bic pen as a marker on passages she found particularly moving. Read chapter 4 twice, she would whisper as they stood by the church gate. Pay attention to how the hero speaks to her when they are in the rain. The balancing act. physics, calculus, and passion. Abina's desk at home became a battlefield of interests. On one side were his heavy SSS2 science textbooks, asterisk biochemistry, Nelkin physics, and further mathematics. On the other, hidden beneath his notebooks, were the vibrant, pocket-sized Mills and Boon novels. His routine shifted. He would solve complex equations for 2 hours, and as a reward, he would dive into the world of sweeping romances for 30 minutes. However, as the weeks passed, the 30 minutes stretched into hours. He began to see patterns in the storytelling that James Hadley Chase never offered. The power of words. He learned that strength wasn't just about winning a fight, it was about the courage to be vulnerable. Observation. He started noticing the small things, the way Neka's eyes brightened when she talked about her future, or the specific way she tied her school tie. Patience. The slow burn tension in the novels taught him that the best things in life weren't rushed. His mother even noticed a change. Abina, she remarked one evening while they were shelling a goozy, you are very quiet lately. And you've started helping me with the heavy lifting without me even asking twice. Did they teach you a new commandment in church? The transformation, from bodyguard to romantic. The rugged, initiative boy, exterior began to soften, replaced by a refined chivalry that was rare among the boys in their neighborhood. Abina was still the protector, but the way he protected Neka changed. The language of flowers and gestures. One afternoon, while they were returning from a holiday lesson, they passed a vendor selling small, colorful trinkets and snacks. Usually, Abina would just walk past, focused on the destination. But today, he stopped. He bought a small, polished stone pendant, not because it was expensive, but because the color reminded him of the sapphire eyes described in the book he had finished the night before. For you, he said, handing it to her. No jokes, no teasing. Just a direct, steady gaze. Neka was stunned. Abina, what is this for? Because the hero in the book said that a gift given for no reason is the only one that truly matters, he replied, a bit of a flush creeping up his neck. A new way of listening. He stopped interrupting her. When she complained about a difficult teacher or her stress with the Altar Girl Guild, he didn't just offer solutions, like he used to. He listened with the empathy he had read about in those pages. He began to use words like precious, cherish, and always, incorporating them into their daily banter so naturally that Neka found herself blushing more often than not. The emotional bridge. By the middle of their senior year, the Mills and Boon phase had done its work. It had bridged the gap between childhood friendship and young adult love. Abina was no longer just the boy from the street who kept the bullies away, he was becoming the man who understood Neka's heart. The red dust of Feg still swirled around them, but for Abina, the world was no longer a crime thriller or a series of chores. It was a story he was writing alongside Neka, one page at a time, with a blue Bic pen marking the spot where their hearts finally met. As they moved into their final year of senior secondary school, the quiet bubble they had built in Feg began to feel the pressure of the outside world. They were no longer the scrawny children who played in the red dust, they had become the star couple of the neighborhood, even if they hadn't officially used that label yet. With their transformation came a barrage of distractions that tested the foundation they had built through shared chores and romance novels. The siege of Neka's beauty. Neka had blossomed into a stunning young woman. Her grace, honed by years of serving at the altar, combined with a sharp intelligence that made her stand out in any crowd. Soon, she wasn't just being noticed by the boys on their street, she was being pursued by older, wealthier suitors. The big boys of Onitsha, university students returning for holidays and young traders from the main market began to notice her. They would pull up in shiny cars or boot Mercedes near her school gate, offering her expensive gifts, fancy wristwatches, or imported chocolates. The peer pressure. Her female classmates would whisper in her ear, Neka, look at that guy. He's a big boy. Why are you still walking home with Abina? Does he have a car? All he gives you are old novels. The subtle temptation. It wasn't just the money, it was the persistent attention. Every corner she turned, there was a new brother, offering to carry her bag or pay for her transport, trying to chip away at her loyalty. The magnetism of Abina's character. Abina had undergone a transformation of his own. He had shot up in height, his shoulders broadening from years of fetching water and helping his mother. But it was his character, the rare mix of a tough fag boy and the sensitive soul he'd discovered through Mills and Boone, that made him a magnet for every girl in the parish. The gentle giant. Unlike other boys who were loud and boastful, Abina was calm, observant, and respectful. This gentlemanly aura was intoxicating to the girls in the choir and the girls' brigade. The love letters. Abina started finding scented notes tucked into his lockers and even his prayer books. Girls would, accidentally, trip near him just to have him catch them, or they would constantly ask him for help with their physics and further maths. The neighborhood talk. The older women on the street would tease his mother, saying, "Your son is a diamond. If he doesn't watch out, the girls in this Inicha will tear his shirt." The breaking point. The tension reached a peak one Saturday evening after a heavy rain. Nneka had been approached by a wealthy shop owner who had sent a messenger to her house with a lace fabric gift, while Abina had spent the afternoon dodging the advances of a senior girl who insisted he walk her home instead. They met at their usual spot under the whistling pine, but the air was thick with unspoken anxiety. They looked at each other, really looked, and saw the exhaustion of being hunted by others. "We need to talk," Abina said, his voice firm but laced with the tenderness he had learned from his books. "Before the world pulls us apart." The agreement, the Feg covenant. They sat on the low wall, the scent of damp earth and roasting corn in the air. For the first time, they spoke about their worries without the mask of childhood playfulness. 1. Transparency over secrets. Nneka spoke first. "Abina, people see me and see a trophy. They think money can buy my time. But they don't know the boy who protected me from bullies when I was 6. I don't want their lace or their cars, but I'm tired of the pressure." Abina took her hand, his grip steady. "And I'm tired of the notes and the whispers. They see a handsome face, but they don't know the girl who taught me how to feel. I don't want their attention, I only want yours." 2. The mutual shield. They came to a solemn agreement that evening. The public front. They would no longer hide their preference for one another. If a big boy approached Nneka, she would mention Abina's name with pride. If a girl flirted with Abina, he would make it clear his heart was already occupied. The circle of trust. They promised that no matter what rumor they heard, and Inicha is a city of many rumors, they would come to each other first for the truth. 3. The future beyond the street. They agreed that their primary focus remained their exams and their future. They weren't just playing house, they were building a life. The distractions were just noise in a James Hadley Chase novel, while their bond was the eternal flame from a Mills and Boone. As the moon rose over Feg, the two childhood friends stood up, no longer just neighbors, but partners. The suitors and the admirers were still there, but they no longer mattered. Abina and Nneka had realized that the greatest treasure in all of Inicha wasn't in the market, it was standing right in front of them.
I will write to you every day. I promise I'll be back soon.
The trajectory of life in Inicha often follows the predictable rhythms of the market and the church, but for Abina and Nneka, the end of their secondary school days brought a sudden, jarring shift. The foundation they had built, the shared novels, the altar service, and the quiet walks, was suddenly threatened by the divergent paths of Nigerian reality. The bittersweet news. The news arrived in two waves. First came the joy. Nneka had been admitted to the University of Nigeria, Enugu campus UNEC, to study medicine. It was the fulfillment of a lifelong dream, a testament to her brilliance. The street celebrated, her mother gave extra testimony in church. Then came the blow. Abina's father, facing a sudden hike in their house rent and a shift in his business logistics, decided the family must move to a distant, developing outskirts of Feg, far from the familiar whistling pine tree. Worse still, it was decided that Abina, despite his brilliance in physics and his newfound love for literature, would not be heading to university immediately. He was to be sent to Lagos to serve a wealthy uncle in the electronics trade, the traditional Igba boy apprenticeship. The distance between Enugu and Lagos felt like an ocean, and the move across Feg felt like the end of an era. The last walk, a final chapter. Their last evening together was draped in the heavy humidity of a coming storm. They met at their spot one final time, but the usual laughter was replaced by a suffocating silence. Abina wasn't carrying a James Hadley Chase novel, and Nneka wasn't clutching a Mills and Boon. They were carrying the weight of their looming separation. As they walked toward the Niger River bank to watch the sunset, the red dust seemed to cling to their shoes more stubbornly than ever. Lagos is a world away, Abina, Nneka said, her voice trembling. They say the city swallows people. They say you'll start carrying the heavy containers at Alaba and forget the girl who taught you how to read romance. Abina stopped and turned to her. He had grown into a man of few but deep words. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, worn notebook, the one where he had scribbled his favorite quotes from the books she gave him. Nneka, look at me, he commanded gently. In the novels, the hero goes on a journey. He faces trials. This apprenticeship is my trial. I am going there to build a future so that when you come out as a doctor, I won't just be the boy from the street. I will be a man who can stand beside you. The covenant of promises. They sat on a fallen log, the sounds of the distant Onitsha market fading into a hum. They made a series of promises that felt like a sacred liturgy. The letter promise. Since mobile phones were not yet the ubiquitous tethers they are today, they promised to write. Abina vowed to send a letter every month to her hostel in Enugu, and Nneka promised to reply with the same blue Bic pen she used to mark his pages. The fidelity of character. Abina promised that the gentleman Nneka had cultivated would not be lost in the rugged markets of Lagos. He wouldn't become the rough trader the world expected him to be. The graduation pact. Nneka promised that no matter how many medical suitors or wealthy doctors crossed her path, she would remember the boy who protected her in primary one. The parting gift. Nneka handed him a final book. It wasn't a romance novel this time. It was a leather-bound journal. Write our story in this, Abina, she whispered. Every time you feel like the Lagos sun is too hot or the work is too hard, write down what you're feeling. When we meet again, I want to read every page. The final goodbye. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in bruises of purple and gold. When it was time to leave, the goodbye was not a Hollywood movie scene. It was a quiet, painful tearing of two souls. Abina watched Nneka walk toward her house until her figure was lost in the shadows of the Feg buildings. He felt a hollow ache in his chest, a feeling no chase thriller had ever described, and no Mills and Boon had fully prepared him for. The next morning, Abina was on a young shall grow bus headed for the chaotic energy of Lagos, while Nneka's trunks were being packed for the academic rigors of Enugu. They were separated by geography and destiny, but as the bus pulled out of the Onitsha Park, Abina touched the journal in his bag and felt the ghost of a blue Bic pen. The story wasn't over, it was simply moving into a more difficult volume. The separation that began at the Onitsha bus park stretched into years, and as the distance grew, the silence between them deepened. Life happened. Letters became infrequent as the chaos of the Lagos markets consumed Abina's time and the grueling cycles of ward rounds and medical exams drained Nneka. Though they moved in different worlds, they both found themselves haunted by a standard of love that no one else could meet. The fortress of Dr. Nneka. In Enugu, Nneka became a legend in the medical school halls. She was the Ice Queen, not because she was cold, but because she was untouchable. Her beauty had matured into an elegant, formidable grace, and her success as a young doctor made her the prime target for Nigeria's elite. The professional proposals, junior doctors and senior consultants alike sought her hand. There was Dr. Ike, a brilliant surgeon who could offer her a life of luxury and a practice in the UK. He was perfect on paper, but when he spoke, Nneka found herself subconsciously checking if he had the emotional depth of the heroes in her old novels. He didn't. The big men, wealthy politicians and businessmen tried to sponsor her lifestyle. They sent expensive cars to the hospital parking lot and flowers that cost more than a month's salary. To them, she was a trophy, a beautiful doctor wife to show off. The relational failure, Nneka did try. She entered a few relationships, hoping to move on. But each time, the same problem arose. She was looking for a protector who also understood her soul, a man who could be both Chase tough and Mills and Boone tender. When her partners grew possessive or superficial, she would retreat. She realized she wasn't just looking for a husband, she was looking for the boy from Feg Street. The Gilded Cage of Abina. In the frantic, neon-lit world of Lagos, Abina had achieved the Nigerian dream. He had transitioned from an apprentice to a master, owning a massive electronics conglomerate with branches in Alaba and Idumota. He was tall, wealthy, and carried himself with a quiet authority that turned heads in every room. However, his wealth became his greatest curse in the world of romance. The gold diggers, Abina was surrounded by women who saw his Mercedes and his Lekki house rather than the man who once served at Mass. He went on dates where the conversation was only about European vacations and designer bags. He felt a deep, biting loneliness in crowded rooms. The test of love, he became cynical. He started dressing down on first dates, driving an old car just to see if the woman would stay. Most didn't. He missed the days when Nneka loved him because he protected her from a school bully, not because he could buy her a diamond. The character gap. Every woman he met seemed to lack the substance he had learned to value. He wanted someone who could discuss the nuances of a story, someone who shared his history of red dust and shared chores. The socialites of Lagos were a far cry from the altar girl who held a blue Bic pen in her novel. The Crossroads of the Heart. 10 years after their last walk in Feg, both Abina and Nneka reached a psychological breaking point. Nneka sat in her apartment in Enugu, looking at a glittering engagement ring left on her table by a man she had just turned down. She was 30, successful, and lonely in a crowd. Her mother's friends were whispering about her pickiness, but she felt a hollow ache that medicine couldn't cure. She pulled out the old, tattered journal Abina had promised to write in, now empty of his words but full of her memories. In Lagos, Abina stood on the balcony of his penthouse, looking out at the Atlantic Ocean. He had everything he thought he wanted, but he realized he had spent a decade building a kingdom. For a queen who wasn't there. He was tired of the games, the fake smiles, and the transactional nature of his relationships. Why is it, Abina mused, swirling a glass of water, that I have all the money to buy a library of romance, but I haven't lived a single chapter of it since I left Onitsha? They were both at a crossroads. They had tried to build lives independently, to follow the paths set by their parents and society. But the foundations laid in the church pews and the dusty streets of Feg were too strong to be built over. They were successful, they were big people, but they were both fundamentally incomplete. The silence between them was no longer just distance, it was a question. And as the moon rose over both Enugu and Lagos, two hearts, miles apart, began to realize that the only way forward was to look back.
After all this time, I finally found you.
I thought I lost this forever. Thank you for keeping it safe.
The search for the one had become a wearying chore for both Abina and Nneka. In Lagos, Abina stopped attending the high society galas where he was constantly vetted, by mothers of eligible socialites. In Enugu, Nneka poured herself into her medical research, using her white coat as armor against a world that told her she was too successful to be loved. They were both searching, but they were looking for a ghost, a version of a person they hadn't seen in over a decade. The chance encounter at Alaba. The turning point came on a Tuesday afternoon that smelled of exhaust and rain. Abina was overseeing a shipment at his warehouse when he heard a voice that felt like a frequency from a past life. Abina from Feg Street. It was Henry, their childhood playmate who used to join them for the street holiday programs. The two men embraced, the years of separation melting away in the heat of the market. Over a cold bottle of malt, the conversation inevitably turned to the one name that had remained a silent prayer in Abina's heart. "I've looked for her, Henry," Abina admitted, his voice heavy. "I went back to Onitsha, but her family had moved. I thought she might be married in the UK or America by now." Henry smiled, a knowing glint in his eyes. "She's not in the UK, and she's definitely not married. She's Drive, Nneka now. She's a consultant in Enugu. I see her whenever I go home for the weekends." The wedding plot. Henry was getting married in 3 months, and he realized he held the keys to a story that had been paused for too long. He became a man on a mission. The Enugu trips. Henry traveled from Lagos to Enugu twice in those 3 months. The first time, he visited Nneka at the hospital, casually mentioning he was getting married. The second time, he went specifically to hand-deliver her invitation, insisting that as his sister from Feg, her absence would be an insult to the street. The secret: he never told Nneka that Abina was coming. He only told Abina, "If you want to find what you lost, be at my wedding in Onitsha." The reunion at the altar. The wedding was held at the very same parish in Feg where they had served as altar boy and altar girl. The air was thick with the scent of lilies and the nostalgia of childhood. Nneka sat in the middle row, looking radiant in a peach lace gown, but her eyes kept wandering to the altar, remembering the boy in the red surplice. When the bridal procession began, she turned her head toward the back of the church, and the world stopped. Standing near the entrance, acting as a groomsman for Henry, was a man who looked like the hero of every Mills and Boon she had ever read. He was taller, his face carved with the maturity of Lagos hustle, but the eyes were unmistakably the same eyes that had protected her from bullies in Primary 1. Abina saw her. The big boy of Alaba Market froze. The wealth, the cars, and the lonely nights vanished. All he saw was the girl with the blue Bic pen. The journal's return. During the reception, away from the loud music of the high table, they found a quiet corner in the parish hall garden, the same place where they used to hide to read novels during church bazaars. They stood in silence for a long time, the weight of 10 years pressing against them. Abina reached into the inner pocket of his designer suit and pulled out a small, worn, leather-bound object. It was the journal Nneka had given him on their last day in Feg. He didn't say a word. He simply handed it to her. Nneka took it with trembling hands. She opened the first page. It wasn't empty. Despite the years of silence, Abina had filled every single page with dates, locations, and short entries. June 12, Lagos. Saw a girl today who laughed like you. I almost called your name. September 20th. I bought my first shop today. I wish you were here to see it. January 1st. Happy New Year, Nneka. I am still the gentleman you made me. The Tears of Feg. As Nneka read the entries, the Ice Queen of Enugu Medical School crumbled. Tears began to track down her face, splashing onto the ink of the journal. She looked up at him, her voice a broken whisper. You kept it. You actually wrote in it. Abina stepped forward, finally closing the distance. His own eyes were blurred with tears, the first he had shed since he left Onitsha. I told you, Nneka. This was my trial. I had to build a kingdom so I could come back for my queen. I never stopped reading our story. In the middle of the wedding celebration, surrounded by the ghosts of their childhood and the dust of the street that raised them, they held each other. It wasn't a scene from a James Hadley Chase thriller or a fantasy from a Mills and Boon. It was something better. It was a reunion of two souls who had survived the world and finally found their way home. The reception
was so worried we
still
wouldn't
in
make
full
it.
swing when Abina
I
led
know,
NECA toward
but
the
we are
parking
here
lot.
now,
The
together.
dusty evening air of
It's
Feg was
okay.
momentarily transformed by the sight of his Rolls-Royce Phantom, its midnight blue paint shimmering under the streetlights. As the chauffeur opened the door, a few onlookers whispered, but for the first time in their lives, Abina and NECA didn't notice the crowd. The drive, a sanctuary on wheels. Inside the car, the world of Anitya was silenced by the thick insulation of the luxury vehicle. The scent of high-end leather and a hint of NECA's perfume filled the space. As the car glided toward the bridge, leaving the noise of the wedding behind, the weight of a decade finally broke them. They sat close, their hands interlocked so tightly it was as if they feared the other might vanish into the red dust again. Narrating the years of silence. I used to sit in my apartment in Enugu, NECA began, her voice cracking as the tears began to flow freely. I would look at the stethoscope around my neck and feel so successful, yet so empty. Every man who approached me felt like a shadow. I was looking for the boy who used to carry my heavy school bag, and I couldn't find him anywhere. Abina wiped a tear from her cheek, his own eyes brimming. Lagos was a desert for me, NECA. People saw the big boy in the Rolls-Royce, but I was just a lonely boy from Feg Street. I dated women who loved my bank account, but none of them knew who I was before the money. I nearly gave up. I thought you had forgotten our promise. They wept together, tears for the missed birthdays, the lonely Christmases, and the letters that never reached their destination. It was a sad love story of two people who had to grow up apart to appreciate the magnitude of what they had together. The gratitude for Henry. As the car pulled up to the entrance of the luxury hotel where Abina was staying, their conversation turned to the man who had played Destiny's hand. If not for Henry, Abina whispered, I would still be staring at the Atlantic in Lagos, wondering, what if? He didn't just invite me to a wedding, he saved my life. NECA nodded, leaning her head on his shoulder. He was so persistent. He came to the hospital twice, insisting I must be there. He knew. He saw the loneliness in my eyes even when I tried to hide it with my medical degree. We owe him more than a wedding gift, we owe him our future. The new chapter, the next plan. In the quiet of the hotel suite, overlooking the lights of the city and the distant glimmer of the river Niger, the crossroads they had faced earlier that year finally straightened into a single path. They weren't going to let another day go by in silence. The immediate strategy. Closing the distance. Abina made it clear that the distance between Lagos and Enugu was officially over. He planned to open a major regional head office for his company in Enugu, allowing him to be with her while she continued her specialist medical practice. The introduction. They agreed that the very next morning, they would visit their mothers together, the two women whose friendship started this entire journey. They wanted to show the street that the altar boy and altar girl were back, and this time, it was forever. The final covenant. There would be no more proposals from strangers. Abina looked into her eyes and told her that he had already started planning a wedding that would make Henry's look like a rehearsal. A love refined. As they stood on the balcony, watching the moon hang over the city that raised them, they realized they were no longer the children reading Mills and Boon. They were the authors of their own story, one that had survived the red dust of Feg, the markets of Lagos, and the hospital wards of Enugu. The sad story had reached its final page, and the sequel was beginning. They were happy, they were wealthy, and they were successful, but more importantly, they were finally, undeniably, home.
NECA, my love, you have made me the happiest man alive today. Thank you all for celebrating with us.
The circle was finally complete. The red dust of Fega, Onitsha, which had witnessed their childhood innocence and their painful separation, was now stirred by the tires of luxury convoys. The wedding of Dr. Neka and Chief Obinna was not just a marriage. It was a legendary homecoming that the street would talk about for decades. Return to the sacred foundation. The ceremony took place at the very same parish where they had served as children. The church was transformed. The wooden pews where they once sat reading Mills and Boone were draped in ivory silk and adorned with fresh lilies. As the choir sang, the atmosphere was thick with nostalgia. The elderly parishioners, who remembered Obinna as the diligent altar boy and Neka as the graceful altar girl, wiped tears from their eyes. When Obinna stood at the altar, no longer in a server's surplice but in a bespoke midnight blue suit, and watched Neka walk down the aisle, the silence in the church was a tribute to a love that had survived the ultimate test of time and distance. Honoring the architect of reunion. Henry. If the wedding had a hero other than the couple, it was Henry. Obinna and Neka ensured that his role in their story was recognized by everyone in attendance. The seat of honor. Henry was not just a guest. He was given a seat at the high table, usually reserved only for parents and the most senior dignitaries. The public tribute. During the reception, Obinna took the microphone. He ignored his prepared speech and spoke from the heart. In Lagos, I had everything but a soul. In Enugu, Neka had everything but her heart. It took a brother who remembered the dust of Fege to bring us back together. Henry, you didn't just give me a wedding invitation. You gave me my life back. The gift of gratitude. In a move that left the crowd cheering, Obinna presented Henry with a brand new SUV and a significant stake in one of his new business ventures in the East, ensuring that Henry's kindness would be rewarded with lifelong security. A lavish celebration in Onitsha. The reception was a spectacle of wealth, culture, and pure joy. It was the perfect blend of the Onitsha hustle and Lekki luxury. The atmosphere. The venue was a massive marquee erected in a sprawling garden near the Niger River. The decor was a fusion of traditional Igbo royalty and modern elegance. Thousands of fairy lights hung from the ceiling, mimicking the stars they used to watch from the whistling pine tree. The feast and fanfare. The menu. The food was a legendary spread. There was a dedicated Fege corner, serving the local delicacies they grew up eating, alongside international cuisines for the dignitaries who had flown in from Lagos and abroad. The music. A famous high-life band played alongside a modern Afrobeat star, ensuring that both the elders and the youth remained on the dance floor. The money rain. In true Onitsha fashion, the spraying of Naira was like a whirlwind. As Obinna and Neka danced, the floor was covered in a carpet of notes, a symbol of the abundance that their union had brought, the fulfillment of a childhood promise. As the night drew to a close, the couple stood together, looking out at the crowd of friends, family, and former neighbors. They weren't just the successful doctor and the wealthy businessman anymore. They were the kids from the street who had made it. Neka leaned into Obinna, clutching a small bouquet that had a blue Bic pen tucked discreetly into the stems, a secret tribute to the beginning of their romance. "We are no longer reading the novels, Obinna," she whispered over the sound of the music. "No," he replied, kissing her forehead. "We are writing the greatest one Fega has ever seen." The celebration lasted until the early hours of the morning. As the guests finally departed, the story of Obinna and Neka remained etched into the heart of Onitsha, a testament that true love, rooted in character and nurtured by history, always finds its way back to where it all began.
The transition from the bustling markets of Lagos to the serene hills of Enugu marked the beginning of a new empire for Obinna. It wasn't just a business move, it was a love letter to his wife, ensuring that their lives would never again be dictated by the distance of a highway. The zenith of commerce, the Enugu headquarters. Abina didn't just open an office, he constructed a landmark. Located in the heart of Independence Layout, the Abina Global Holdings headquarters became a marvel of modern architecture. The design, the building was a shimmering glass tower, reflecting the blue Enugu sky. Abina insisted on a wing dedicated to philanthropy, including a foundation that provided scholarships for children from FEG who excelled in the sciences and literature. The personal touch. In his private executive office, on a shelf that held trophies and industry awards, sat the most valuable items, a tattered Mills and Boon novel and a leather-bound journal. It served as a constant reminder that his wealth was built on the foundation of the discipline he learned as a young boy in Onitsha. The launch, the grand opening, was a state event. Nneka stood by his side, cutting the ribbon with the same grace she used in the operating theater. Together, they represented the perfect synergy of Nigerian excellence, medicine and commerce. The sanctuary, the residential estate. With the business established, Abina turned his attention to their home. He purchased a sprawling estate on the outskirts of the city, where the air was cool and the noise of the city felt like a distant hum. The house was a masterpiece of comfort and elegance. The gardens, remembering their childhood under the whistling pine, he planted a lush grove of trees where they could walk in the evenings. The library, he built a massive, two-story library for Nneka, filling it with medical journals for her career and every romance novel she had ever mentioned wanting to read. The altar, a small, private chapel, was built into the east wing, a tribute to the parish where their journey began, allowing them to start every morning in prayer just as they had during Mass in FEG. 3 years later, the double blessing. The house was beautiful, but it was quiet, until 3 years into their marriage, when the halls were suddenly filled with the greatest joy they had ever known. Nneka gave birth to healthy, vibrant twin boys. The news sparked a week of celebration between Enugu and Onitsha. For Abina and Nneka, the names of their sons were a foregone conclusion, chosen to honor the past and the man who made their present possible. 1. Abina Jnr. The heir of character. The first twin was named after his father. Abina wanted his son to inherit more than just his name, he wanted him to inherit the spirit of the gentleman that Nneka had cultivated years ago. He was the spitting image of his father, calm, observant, and already showing a protective nature toward his brother. 2. Henry, the gift of loyalty. The second twin was named in honor of Henry, their mutual friend whose persistence had reunited them. It was the highest honor they could bestow. When Henry visited the house to meet his namesake, he wept as he held the boy, realizing that his simple act of kindness had resulted in a legacy that would outlive them all. A life of fullness. Today, the red dust of FEG is a distant but cherished memory. On weekends, Abina and Nneka often take the twins back to Onitsha to visit their grandmothers. They drive past the old parish, past the spot where the whistling pine tree once stood, and past the streets where a young boy once protected a girl out of a sense of duty. They are no longer looking for love, they are living it. Between the high-stakes world of Abina's conglomerate and the life-saving halls of Nneka's medical practice, they have found a perfect rhythm. As they watch young Abina and little Henry play in the gardens of their Enugu home, they know that their story is no longer a sad love story or a pocket-sized novel. It is a living, breathing reality, a testament that when you protect someone's heart, the universe eventually conspires to give you everything.